song for you called The Kellys, very much a comical Irish-American style song. You probably wouldn't have a song written like that at any time in Ireland, very much written from the Irish-American perspective. And it was written by a man from County Wicklow called Sean O'Nolan. And he was born in Wicklow in, I think, 1876, and he emigrated to the Boston area in 1898. We believe that was the year. It's not exactly certain, but probably that year. He settled in Boston for a few decades and became a piper. He played with the Hannafin Brothers from County Kerry, who played with Dan Sullivan's Shamrock Band up there, a very famous orchestra in the Boston area, catering to Irish immigrants and their descendants in the Boston area. And he moved down after his wife died. He moved down to New York City in 1931. He'd visited there several times beforehand, but he made his home there. And he made his home in 76th Street and 3rd Avenue at a place that was the music store, the Irish Shamrock store, and he managed that store for the rest of his life. I first heard about him through Eileen McNulty. I visited Eileen in Hoboken, New Jersey in 1977, and she was the last surviving member of the famous McNulty family. And she told me that in the early years of their performing back in the 1930s, they beat a path to the door of the Irish Shamrock store, the Shamrock Music Store, and they learned an awful lot of songs from Sean O'Nolan. He was a songwriter, he was a singer, he was a comedian, a raconteur, played the pipes, did a bit of everything. He reminded me a bit of Johnny Patterson, the circus clown from Feakle, who spent time in New York and wrote great songs like Bridget Donahue. But anyway, I started to sing the song myself, The Kellys. Sean O'Nolan, he went back to Ireland with the widow of Matty Haskins, who was the owner of the Shamrock Music Store. And he took films. He was a man very much ahead of his time. And I wish I knew more about him and had known more about him, by the time I came to America in 1973. But through his songs, he lives on. Started to sing the song The Kellys with Robbie O'Connell and Jimmy Keane. And the most recent time that I sang it publicly was about 2 years ago in Philadelphia. Now, going back in years to my early time in America, I was developing an interest in Irish-American song without knowing a lot about it. And I was living in Germantown in Philadelphia. And I got a call one day from a man called O'Donnell from Chestnut Hill. It's the fancy neighborhood. And he said, I've heard that you're interested in Irish music, and I got your name from Dennis Clark, the historian. And he said, I have a collection of sheet music and I'm retiring. He said, and I'd like to sell them. I said, I have 3,000 pieces of sheet music and I'd like you to come and look at them. And I did. And he spread them out on the floor of his house, and I never saw anything like it. They spread through the living room, they spread across the kitchen, they spread through the drawing room. They nearly spread out of the house. 3,000 pieces of sheet music that he'd collected in his lifetime. He worked in the music business. And there were sheet music of songs I hadn't really known about. Tin Pan Alley songs like Ireland Must Be Heaven, for my mother came from there, Galway Bay, the Lakes of Killarney, Arawana. The list goes on and on and on. And I knew there were these kind of nostalgic, sentimental songs that Tin Pan Alley was famous for, but I knew nothing about that at that time. But I knew that they were culturally important. I wasn't interested in sentimental songs about an idealized Ireland then. I developed an interest in it later on. But I knew they were important, but I didn't have $3,000, didn't have $300 to my name. And I called up the Library of Congress and I called up the Smithsonian Institution. I got in touch with Kenneth Goldstein, the professor of folklore at the University of Pennsylvania, my mentor. I said, would anybody buy these? And nobody seemed to have an interest. They were interested in other things. Kenny was interested in things that were pre-musical literacy. And this was sheet music that had to be read by people who knew how to play the piano and knew how to read music. So I said, I'm sorry, it's not going to work out. And then the years passed and I made a few bob. And then I had $3,000. And I called him up again. I said, is that collection still for sale? He said, it sold 1 week ago. And I said, damn. I said, just as a matter of interest, who bought it? He said, Grace Kelly, Princess Grace. She has an Irish library in over there in Monaco, and she had a broker buy the collection for her. And I said, how much she paid? She paid the $3,000 that I was still asking for it. And I said, well, that's one that got away. Well, anyway, over the next 25 years, I started to get an interest in it, mostly through Kenny Goldstein going to paper ephemera shows and buying up my own collection of sheet music, and I did. And eventually I amassed about the same number at a considerably higher cost, I can tell you, well into the 5 figures. And that collection now is in New York University Library in the Tamiment collection in my name. And that was that. It ended up there in about 2006. Well, 2 years ago, I got a call from Villanova University, from Joseph Lennon in the Irish Studies Department, and he says to me, he said, Villanova University has taken over the Kelly House, which has been refurbished, and it's just down in East Falls, about a mile away from where I lived all these years in Germantown. I was up in New York, of course, two years ago, and he said, they've asked us to curate the house and put on programs there. And he said, we put on one on emigration. He said, they've asked us now to curate and do a public presentation of the Grace Kelly sheet music collection. He says, do you know anything about that? I said, do I know anything about that? So anyway, we arranged it, and down I went, and I went with Athena Turgis and Liz Hanley down to the Kelly House. It was a great night, and her collection more or less mirrored mine, and we spread them out all over the living room, and I gave a big old talk on Tin Pan Alley and the importance of Irish music as social documentation as well as art. And it was a great night. But what song was appropriate to sing? I did a few songs after it. Of course I sang The Kellys. And the Kellys are a pretty amazing family. John Kelly came as an immigrant from Newport in Westport, near Westport in County Mayo, and he arrived in Philadelphia, I think in 1879, and he had a family of 10 children, and talk about famous children. There was John B. Kelly, who built an empire of bricks. He was also an Olympic sculpsman, and he was the first Irish-American Catholic allowed to be a member of those rowing clubs on Kelly Drive. He was a famous and very wealthy man. There was Walter C. Kelly, who was the most notorious comedian of his time, performed in Broadway and then moved out to Los Angeles, where he was in some movies. A very, very controversial character who didn't mind insulting other racial and ethnic groups, including the Irish themselves. There was George Kelly, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. He was the darling of New York, writing satirical, ironic comedies. And, of course, there was Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly, who in her day was one of the most famous, strikingly attractive and talented women in the world. She became a Hollywood star in really gripping movies like Rear Window, and of course she starred in many other films as well. She was introduced to the legendary director Alfred Hitchcock by her brother Walter, and ended up being one of his most favourite actresses. You could almost say she was Hollywood, and certainly was Philadelphia, royalty, and then became actual royalty with her marriage to Prince Rainier of Monaco in 1956. She never stopped being really proud of her Irish and Irish-American identity, and I remember well that my mother couldn't stop talking about her when the royal pair visited Ireland in 1961. I was 16 at the time myself, and they met with President De Valera and his wife and drew enormous crowds all over the country. In fact, you could say the nation was in virtual mourning in 1982 when she died tragically in a car accident in Monaco at the age of 52, but not before she had opened up the Princess Grace Irish Library in Monaco as an enduring legacy. What an extraordinary story, with its humble origins in Newport, County Mayo, the county hardest hit by the rigours of the Great Irish Famine. Well, onto this great Irish-American song, and I'm delighted to sing it with some great musical friends of mine. There's Athena Turgis on five-string fiddle in Tuscany, Italy. There's Liz Hanley singing harmony in Boston. And there's the master of the stomach Steinway himself, Jimmy Keane in Chicago, playing the piano accordion, the Kellys. 3 weeks ago, last Tuesday, I left me home in Cork to find me Uncle Martin Kelly living in New York. I landed in Hoboken and began without delay to find me uncle's residence located on Broadway. I went to the directory me uncle for to find, but I found so many Kellys there that I nearly lost me mind. Well, I went to ask directions from a friendly German Jew, but he says, please excuse me, but me name is Kelly too. And there's Kelly the barman, Kelly the carman, Kelly the sailor who came from Donegal, Kelly from Derry, Kelly from Kerry. But the Kelly I was looking for I could not find at all. Boston, that city of great fame. I heard the Kellys living there had made themselves a name. The Kellys run the State House and the Kellys run the banks, the police and fire department, sure the Kellys fill the ranks. John Kelly runs the railroads, Dan Kelly runs the seas, Kate Kelly runs the suffragettes, and she looks right good to me. Well, I went to ask directions from a naturalized Chinese, but he says, please excuse me, but me name it is Kelly. And there's Kelly from Dublin, Kelly from Sligo, little Mickey Kelly who came from the County Clare. Sure, Kelly built the pyramids with good old Galway granite, and when Kelly discovered the North Pole, sure, he found Pat Kelly there.